Tonight's guest. Lyn Weston, most of you know because she has led services here, she's preached here, you've seen her in other capacities, and you've seen her as Reverend Lyn Weston, an ordained minister with a mission working for Compassion UK. And when it was suggested that I interview her for Sundays at 7, I thought, yeah, that's fine, but don't really know a lot about her. Then she sent me her testimony, and I read it, and I read it, and I read it, and I thought, yes, this lady has a story that you all need to hear. You will go away, I promise you, having learned a lot more about a person tonight and how the Lord has worked in her life. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Lyn Weston.
Thank you, David.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Lyn, welcome to Sundays at 7.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Good. When we first met, I had no idea, obviously, from what I've said, of the many issues that you were confronted with in your life, particularly in the early years. You were born in Northern Ireland and lived there during the Troubles. Briefly, do you have any memories of day-to-day issues during that time? Seems a long time ago, but I'm sure you know.
I remember it well, and just for the avoidance of doubt, it wasn't that long ago. I'm just giving my age away. The trouble started the year I was born, and the first thing I would like to say is there is no connection between my birth and the Troubles beginning. They were a completely separate issue. But it was all I knew. It was all I knew as a young girl, that I lived in a troubled country. I didn't know anything else. And I would say my memories are it was a very joyful childhood. Very joyful, but I took for granted everything going on around me. It was normal practice to be driving. I lived just outside Belfast, and I would go every Saturday with my mum and my granny into Belfast, and we would have coffee shop in the Abercorn, which I'll talk about later. But it was normal to be driving behind a Land Rover with army men pointing their gun right in front of you. You didn't think, oh, this is unusual or this is frightening. I didn't know anything else. It was normal to go through barracks and be searched and checked. And
what you knew at the time.
I only knew that.
Yeah.
And my life there was very involved in the church. My mum and dad were Methodists and very devoted, faithful Methodists. But we tended to go to lots of different churches. My childhood was, we had our own church, but in the summertime, you just went to all the different summer clubs and all the different churches. So church was a very big part of my life.
Well, fundamentally, you were brought up in a Christian family.
Yes.
With certain values and principles. Just tell me a little bit about your mum and dad and other family members.
Yeah, so my mum and dad, I lost both of them. I lost my dad in my late 20s. I lost my mum in 2016. They were incredible parents. They just loved Jesus. And from just being a baby, I don't ever remember anything else other than being taught about being completely dependent on Jesus. We were taught the scriptures from a very young age. I would say the thing I remember about my parents is how strong they were, because they had a lot to contend with in life, more than maybe most. But their faithfulness never, ever, no matter how much heartbreak that they faced, their faithfulness just grew stronger and stronger. And then I had an older brother, David, who's 2 years older than me, and he looked after me. He was very protective of me as a child, sometimes too protective, and I had to tell him off a few times to give me a bit of space. And then I had a younger brother, Richard, who I lost. We'll talk later about that.
When I read through your testimony, you mentioned that even at the age of 10, God had made a massive impact on your life. But at the age of just 3, you came close to death through an outbreak of meningitis. 8 other children in your area caught it, and they all died. So what happened to you? Tell me about that
Yeah.
incident.
It's been quite hard recently hearing about the meningitis outbreak because that was very
Yeah.
similar to what happened. My mum had taken me to the GP and said she thought I was very ill, and they'd said it was German measles, so I was being asked to just lie on the couch and my mum look after me. But she looked at me one day and a mother's intuition, she said, I think my little girl's about to die. So she phoned the ambulance and she got the ambulance. This was in the height of the Troubles, so there was massive riots going on in Belfast. And the big children's hospital, the Royal Victoria Hospital, was at the end of the riot. So between our home and there was a massive riot going on. And the ambulance came and they were taking me to hospital. It was a smaller hospital that probably couldn't have treated. And it came over in the ambulance to say, if that little girl's going to die, don't bring her here because there's nothing we can do. And there's just too much going on today. So my mum begged this ambulance driver if he would take me to Belfast. And he said, there's a riot going on. And my mum said, my little girl's about to die. And he did a big U-turn. And they say you don't remember stuff as a young child unless there's a trauma. But I remember looking out the window and seeing the leaves on the tree and this guy going, come on, we're going to sort this. And he turned the ambulance and he drove me right through the middle of a riot. And I was in intensive care for a number of days, and all the other children died. One by one, they all died. And I remember I was so weak, I was so thin, losing weight dramatically, rolled up in a ball, all these injections going into me. And I remember my dad, who I adored. My dad was my absolute hero. And my dad said, they won't let me come back and see you unless you eat, because they needed to build my strength. And he obviously didn't mean that. He was just desperate. And I sat up in my bed and I shouted, I need a red lollipop, and I need a red lollipop now. And apparently that red lollipop got enough strength into me to save my life. So I always said, my dad and the red lollipop saved my life. And of course, Jesus.
When I read this, I thought, my goodness, God certainly had his hand on your life, as with the others. But you were saved, I believe, for a ministry in the future. Well, that's an incredible story, and how relieved your mum and dad must have been at the time.
It was hard for them because they grew up. I grew up amongst the parents of all the children who died. So they were very relieved, but it was very tough for them to every day look into the eyes of the other parents.
Your mum and dad, carrying on with the theme, they survived a number of traumatic events, including narrowly avoiding a petrol bomb attack and the loss of your 9-month-old brother, Richard, who died from cancer. Their faith somehow remained solid and firm. They must have been amazing people.
They were incredible. The year after Richard died, because my mum went through the same ordeal, she went to the doctor with my brother who had a cough, and they said, you're clearly neurotic now because of what happened to Lyn. Let me give you antidepressants. And she said, my son is ill. And the GP wouldn't help. So she actually went straight to the Royal Victoria Hospital herself with this little baby in her arms and said, look at my son. And he was immediately sent to a children's hospital, an end-of-life hospital. She was incredible. She was resilient and strong, but would have done anything to fight for her children. My dad was an incredible man. He was a businessman. And actually, the petrol bomb situation on our house was because he was a mistaken identity. He used to drive a Granada and wear a trench coat, and somebody thought he was one of the senior police officers in Northern Ireland, followed him home, and petrol bombed our house on Christmas Eve. So we had our Christmas day that day with the whole front of our house blackened out, but it was because they thought he was the chief inspector of the police. And we narrowly missed so many bombs. So my mum and granny went into Belfast every Saturday, and One day we just had coffee and we just left the Abercorn, the famous Abercorn bombing that people will have heard about. And we were literally 20 seconds outside the Abercorn, and a young female IRA member had went in and blown up the Abercorn. She'd actually tried to get out, but it had blown up under her feet. And we were just whooshed along by the wind behind us. Another day, my dad was driving us out on a Sunday afternoon, and two guys came out with balaclavas on, pointed guns at us. But my dad was a great driver, which I didn't inherit from him. But he was a great driver, and he just did a big U-turn and got us to safety. It was just trauma after trauma after trauma in our childhood. But we were always dependent on God and always thankful to him for our safety.
Throughout the events, I mean, you've outlined about 5 or 6 that would upset anybody. Looking back on those times, what do you realize about God's presence then? Because there were so many different life-threatening situations, loss of a brother, etc. That must have been so traumatic at the time. And it doesn't go away, does it? It must have stayed with you.
Yeah. I remember at the time it was faith that kept us going. But it was in my 30s, I remember very clearly the intimate presence of God saying, do you remember then?
Yeah.
I was there. Do you remember then? I was there. And every single one, that reminder, and then looking back and remembering the depth of his presence. So, but it was years later before I felt his voice say that. At the time, we just lived by faith.
What you saw in your young life left you with a strong desire to fight for justice, even at the age of 16. Entering into your 20s, your zest for life led you to move to Leeds, to pursue an exciting job, an offer, and you progressed up the career ladder. And you lived life to the full, as you put it, and all that went with it. Tell me about those times.
Well, as I was growing up, everybody was just so happy that I was alive. My brother was really clever, really, really clever. He used to get 99 out of 100 in all his exams. And everybody just went, Lyn's breathing, Lyn's alive. So there was never any big expectations put on me, but this zesty young woman appeared and with a real drive for life. And I don't know how, because I don't know how it happened. I didn't go to university, but I got involved in a leadership development program, and I came to England and became a regional manager in retail. That then got me into the banking world, because the person I'd worked for there asked me to come into the banking world. For about 8 to 10 years, it just sort of kept happening. These doors kept opening for me, and I just kept getting promoted and promoted and promoted and just smiling and going, oh, thank you. But that's not to boast about that, because what happened in that period was Jesus was always there. I always believed, I always loved Jesus, but I definitely got carried away. There was a lot of, in the world I was working in high fashion retail. There was a lot of parties I was invited to. There was a lot of exciting, glitzy things. There was a lot of more and more opportunities. And I just got really busy, and I forgot to put Jesus at the center. And that definitely would be, I would advise anybody, never, ever forget to have Jesus at the center, no matter how busy life is. And I definitely started taking steps away from that intimate daily dependency on him, and that got me into a whole pile of trouble. And I made some very bad decisions in those days.
What age were you then?
That was my 20s. Basically, my 20s are the years I would say I got a lot of things wrong.
What you got wrong and what you saw surely would help you in the generation to follow when you get older to see the pitfalls.
Yeah.
You know, it's all right, we can all say, well, if I got the chance again, I wouldn't do this and I wouldn't do that. But you know what the draw is, don't you?
Yeah.
And the pull.
Yeah. At the time, I didn't see it, or I wouldn't have let it happen.
Yeah.
I thought I was living my best life, and it was very attractive. But, yeah.
You said that God always remained a significant part of your thoughts, but prayer and your relationship had to fit around everything else. You continued, as you said, to make career progress, and then you met your first husband. But you said that your marriage lacked the Christian foundation needed to carry us through a lifetime. What was wrong?
Pretty much everything. Just to be really clear, I have to put emphasis on that was my first husband. Phil, who is here tonight, is not that person. So just to be really clear on that, I always have to put that emphasis on. I met and fell, I wouldn't even say now I fell in love, but fell what I thought was love at the time with my first husband. It was quite early on after we were married that abusive tendencies started to appear. Now, some of the signs were there before we got married, but I definitely was seeing life through a rose-tinted glass. And he had been brought up in church as well, but he definitely was not following that faith and actually began to mock me for my faith. And the abuse started as a lot of emotional abuse. He said a lot of, one minute I would be a princess, the next minute I would be like dirt under his foot. So he could raise me up, and within an hour, I would be the lowest of the low. I would leave work on a Friday evening and everything was great. I wouldn't even have seen him, and I would arrive home and he was angry and maybe wouldn't speak to me for a week, 2 weeks. And then after a period of time, then physical abuse became part of our relationship. He got very angry at stuff, and if he was angry, nothing even to do with me, if he had a bad day in work, he would just pin me up against a wall or thump me in the chest or just hurt me. And I was his punch bag. But then the next day he would maybe wake up in a new mood, and everything would be bright and bubbly again.
I think it's important to mention at this point, your beautiful husband, Phil, and your beautiful son, Luke, are fully aware of what you're telling me and people here tonight.
Yes, they are indeed.
Which is to your credit and to theirs as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing what you have there. You described your life at the time as a living hell of emotional and physical abuse. And then one day you packed your bags and left. How long were you married for?
We were together 10 years, so it was 7.5 years of marriage where that abuse was going on. And being brought up in Northern Ireland, in the church in Northern Ireland, we were brought up with a very black and white, when you marry before God, it's in sickness and in health, and that's why I stayed. This to me was in sickness. So my understanding was that I had to put up with anything that came my way. So it was a long time. There was many times where I reached the lowest point. I remember lying across my bathroom floor and thinking, just take me out of this, God. Please just take me out of this. But by day, I'd progressed a lot in my career, so I would go into work smiling and bubbly and bouncy, putting up this massive barrier. And it was my mum who looked into my eyes and said, your shine, your brightness has gone out. All the light's gone out. So I could smile, but my mum could see that her little girl had gone.
Behind the smile.
Behind the smile.
Yeah.
The other people believed it, but it was gone. And I used to come home at night, and I had so many people in my life, but I was so lonely and I was terrified. But the world saw this bouncy, happy. Our lives looked good on the surface, but behind, when the door closed, it was like a living hell.
A lot of things were happening to you at this time, and also your dad became very ill and he died. How did you cope with that? And what did you say to God? Because I know we've already said how important your dad was to you.
How I coped, it was probably the worst days of my life. It was awful. I probably could best describe it. It was like I'd had my heart ripped out of me, and I was learning to operate without my heart, because he was my hero, but he was also my best friend. I rang my dad every day, or he rang me. We had an hour's conversation. I was in England, he was in Northern Ireland. He was there. And to not have that voice in my desperation I mean, very close to my mum as well, but my dad was just there. So it was awful. And what I said to God was, I know you're there, and I know you do amazing things. It's just really sad that you've let me go. That's how I felt. I just felt that because of how I'd lived my life and because I hadn't put him at the center, and that's not the God we all know, by the way, but that was where I was confused at the time. And I just begged him to take me out of that hell that I was in, whatever way he needed to take me out, by the way.
The really good news was that God always had his hand on your life.
Yeah.
And he started by sending your husband, Phil, who showed you, as you put it, what true love was. You married at St. Peter's in Heswall, and you now have a son, Luke. Tell me about Phil and how special he is, and tell me about Luke.
Yeah. So my first marriage I ran away from. I actually left Derbyshire and I ran to Liverpool and started life again. I lived in a gated community for a while because I was really frightened, because when I actually left I thought I was going to die, and it was quite a lonely life for a while. But Phil was this guy that I'd worked with for a number of years, and he was really nice, and I really trusted him, and he was a really nice person to work with. But then I started doing a 3 Peaks challenge, and we were walking for miles, and I started talking to this colleague called Phil and realized he was one of the most beautiful people I'd ever met. And it takes a lot for me to say this, the closest I'd ever come to meeting somebody like my dad. And I just wish my dad could have met him. And for everything that had been put on me, Phil brought goodness. For every bad word that's been said to me, he brought a kind word. And that has been the story of every day since I've met him. Phil cannot bear being in the limelight, but I have to say it. I always say that Jesus saved my life and Phil saved my life, and they were one and the same thing because he was sent to me. And I was a real wreck at the time. I didn't trust men at all. I was deeply scarred, and just his patience and his kindness just bit by bit brought me on a journey of complete trust and healing. And then Luke came along.
You met, and then you had
We
Luke.
married at St. Peter's, and it was really important for us to marry in church. And I'll never forget that Jonathan Gibbs actually wrote to the Archbishop to say, this couple need to be married before God. It's really important. And we had a beautiful wedding. And then a couple of years later, my dream came true, and Luke came into my life, and he is my special gift from God. And he likes to write that on cards to me a lot as well. Don't forget, I'm your special gift.
Following the loss of a second child, you'd reached a point where you asked God what he wanted to do with your life. And the stranger gave you a passage from Scripture, from Ephesians chapter 2, which talks about being dead but being brought back to life by the grace of Jesus. You listened and felt called to travel to Uganda with a degree of uncertainty. Why Uganda, and what did it do for you?
Yeah. It had been a pretty fragile time in my life because I'd really believed Phil and I had married, Luke had come along, the promise of a second child, and then we lost that child, and I fell apart because I thought God was promising now a whole new season of sunshine, and it didn't come. So we had a big fallout, God and I. 6 months where I came to church every Sunday faithfully, but I always couldn't look at the altar. I just couldn't. I sat to the side, and then one day I was out on a run along the Wirral Way. And I just felt the presence of Jesus surround me like a beautiful warm blanket and say, I've been patient, I've waited, I've let you grieve, but now it's time to come back into my arms. And at that minute, Jesus promised, now we're going to go deep. Now we're going to go deeper than you ever imagined. And I have shown you grace, but I want you to take that grace and I want you to show it to other people across the world. So get ready. And Phil had been in Uganda the year before. I was really pleased. I thought that was his ministry. And I said, maybe someday when they get the toilet situation sorted out in Uganda, I'll go. But bearing in mind, that's going to be a few decades at least. And I was really happy for Phil. But he was working in banking at the same time. We both were working in banking. And he couldn't attend a meeting that he was project managing a trip to Uganda. So he sent me along because I knew all about it because we talked a lot about it, and I took all the papers along, and I fed back all the information that Phil couldn't that night, and I came home and I said, oh dear, Phil, something's happened. I said, God has called me to go to Uganda, and they still haven't sorted out the toilet situation. So I went the next year. Luke was only 4 at the time, and it was awful leaving my 4-year-old. My mum wasn't too happy about me leaving my 4-year-old either, so all the pressure was on. But God had called me to that place. And all I can say is that my trip to Uganda, that I wasn't even supposed to go on, completely changed my life. And it was there that God started to reveal his promises for my ministry. And God showed me stuff way beyond my imagination. We were working with a small charity at the time. We were in Kampala, in the city, and then we were out in rural Masaka. And I started to see poverty like I'd never understood. Nothing like poverty in this country. Children who were desperate. And God had promised me, for grace you have been saved. And actually on one of the walls, one of the places we visited, that was what was across the whole wall. And it was one day, there was a little boy called Jonathan, was put on my knee, and he was 3 years old, but he couldn't sit up, he couldn't walk, he couldn't speak, he couldn't eat properly. But this little boy was put on my knee every day, and I prayed for him, and I prayed for him, I prayed for him, I prayed for healing. I didn't know what I was praying for because I didn't know what was wrong with him. And on the 3rd day, his mum Rose came to me, and she said, there's a beautiful relationship between you. And I said, I don't understand it, because I brought a little toy for him and he didn't want to play with it. And she said, he can't even see you. She said, but you have formed a relationship with this little boy that is beyond human understanding. She said, I don't understand it. And it was that day that God gave me a heart to love children that weren't mine, as well as mine, and said, I will open up your heart to love more and more children, especially those living in extreme poverty.
So in Uganda, you were growing in a new way altogether.
Way, way beyond my understanding. And then when we went to Masaka, I met Pastor Fred, who Phil had told me, Pastor Fred will become your best friend as he has become mine. And it was on a mountaintop in Masaka that God's calling came in my life with Pastor Fred that said, you will leave behind your career in banking, you will go into ordained ministry, which I refused for 4 years. I completely pushed it away for 4 years. We fought on that a lot, did God and I. But you will go and you will serve children living in extreme poverty.
Wow. In 2013, your mum became ill with cancer. But with surgery, she lived for another 3 years, and she died, as you mentioned before, in 2016. This was quite a low point for you, wasn't it?
It was a low point, but by now I was getting the deep understanding that God is with me in every circumstance. My mum's faith was incredible. She did more evangelism in the last 3 years of her life. Her rector would come round to give her communion and said, why don't you bring a few friends? And she'd bring 32 round to have, the little communion cups. And she shared the gospel. She made a TV program in her last year when she was really, really ill. God was really, there was a strength now. There was a strength that he was just bringing my mum home to him. And he was getting her ready. And you could literally watch over those 3 years, her getting ready. And when we actually went to see her in the last few hours of her life, there was a peacefulness that I can't describe. So it was very painful. My mum was an incredible woman. But I knew she was going home, so my pain was just for me and what I was missing. But I was so clear that she was...
But you had a sense of peace.
Peace.
For her, yeah.
Yeah. She was in a lot of pain, and it was really hard to watch her in that pain. So, and we miss her. I mean, Luke misses his, we were just talking about it the other day, he misses his granny so much. She was a force of nature. She was a lot of fun. I wish you all could have met her.
Then you prayed very hard for guidance, and that guidance came to you in the form of a dream, which showed you that your life was to be a bridge between those who have plenty and those who live in extreme poverty, especially children. You were prompted to give up your high-powered job, as you said, as senior vice president responsible for transformation in the Bank of America. You left your job on the Friday and became a director of mission for the Church of England on the Monday. And you were ordained a year later. Just briefly take me through that period.
I often thought that God was sitting having quite a laugh because he took me out of the most fast-moving business in the world and put me into a world that was completely different. I thought I understood the Church of England, knowing the local church, but being in a diocesan role, it was so different from anything I could have understood. But let me probably summarize, it was humbling. I had to start from scratch again. I had to learn a whole new way of being, and I had a lot of joy of working with many, many different churches, but I started to see things that were really difficult in the church, some of the more difficult things, and it really challenged me how you could have such joy and such toxicity sitting side by side. So they were joyous and deeply painful days, all rolled into one. And I did ask God many questions. What do you want me to do with this?
Yeah.
But he answered. He answered, and
absolutely. You are now the Chief Partnership Officer for Compassion UK. Tell me about Compassion UK and what its aims are.
Good. I'm responsible for UK and Ireland. I always love to bring Ireland in because it's my home country. So I'm responsible for all of our work that faces to the church in all its forms. That could be the local church. So we develop church partnerships. We develop partnerships with festivals and events. So next week I'm at Spring Harvest. I was there last week. So all the Christian events, we are often partners with key events. Relationships with philanthropists who want to give kindly, and we take a lot of people out to our field countries, our 29 field countries. But basically, I am now living in that dream that God gave, and I am the bridge. I am saying to people, this is what we need to understand about extreme poverty, and I've got a team of people helping the church in the UK and Ireland understand what extreme poverty is and how we can serve that. And it's about being quite humble, because actually the people in these countries are the experts. They just need our prayer and our support and our help, not doing things for them because they're the experts. So it's about education. It's about illuminating the challenges that there are, illuminating what poverty looks like. And in a lot of the places I visit, poverty looks like living off less than 50 cents a day, because I'm in slums and in some of the most difficult situations.
Now, I know how passionate you are about Compassion UK, but the London Marathon? I understand that you're running in the London Marathon later this month, and we have sponsorship forms for you on the chairs tonight. So, as a former athlete myself, tell me what this is all about.
Well, what it's definitely not about is me running the marathon. Me going through a little bit of pain is nothing. I went to Ghana last year, and Compassion is all about releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. But I visited some of the parts of Savannah region of Ghana that really challenged me, because the children there was no water, even for miles. There just was no water. And there was nowhere for them actually even to go to the toilet. They had to go into the jungle to go to the toilet. And were at risk of being bitten by snakes. So they actually, by going to the toilet, was actually risking their lives. And along the sides of the road, there was many, many little children just standing. And I would say I saw neglect. And we have just started projects in this region, and they're less than a year old. And you can see communities being transformed. But before we can really start our work, we need these children to have water. So ICAMPACT determined that we would have water boreholes in these towns and villages that I visited. And it hit me because I used to run the marathon. I used to do it. I've done it 5 times. And every mile you see water, thrown water bottles or drunk a little bit and then thrown to the side. And the two things just really hit me. This is not right. So my running the London Marathon is to say that water that we throw away so wastefully, how can we go and get water boreholes so these little children can get water in their towns where they are safe, and just get the basic survival techniques. So we've now opened 1 water borehole. When I go in 2 weeks' time to Ghana, we are digging the ground for our 2nd borehole, and me running the marathon is to complete the funding for the 2nd borehole and start the funding for our 3rd one.
And how's your training going?
I've got very sore legs today. I've done 2, because I'm away next week, I've done extra this weekend. So if you see me struggling out of my chair, it's because I've pushed it a bit hard. But it's going very well. I will run it, walk it, or crawl it, whatever I need to do, but I will finish it.
Good for you. And have you been training for this for a few weeks, few months? How long has it taken to get to this stage now?
Well, Phil and I, we walk a lot, so we are pretty in exercise, but actually true marathon training, running has started in January. And I've been out on all of the cold nights, and it's not a lot of fun out on your own at night. No. But
now the sponsorship forms that are on the seats, tell me, what would you like to see from that?
It would just be lovely if St Mary's could support the work
we're
doing.
To take the form away.
Take the form, there's a QR code on it. All you have to do is scan it on your phone, and that will take you straight to my marathon page, and any contributions would be so gratefully received.
And we now all know that it's going to such a genuine, absolute cause, and you're here as the evidence of that, and you're going to do the running. So everybody, please take the form away with you and prayerfully consider what you could do.
The gift aid is also going to the water boreholes, so if you are a UK taxpayer, that is also, so 100% of the money goes direct to the borehole.
Yep. So, a final question. What would Lyn Weston value prayer for on this Easter day?
So I believe God is doing something incredible in the church across the world. And my dream is to see more and more children released from poverty. So my prayer is that I can discern God's will, I can follow his path really clearly, because there are so many opportunities and we have to discern so carefully the countries we go to, the projects we support. So my prayer is for wisdom. And my second prayer is for my family, who I just couldn't do this without. They are such incredible. Phil and Luke, I couldn't do it without them. So just to pray for them. Phil has got the patience of 100 saints, and just a prayer of thanks and gratitude, but pray for them. Pray for Luke to do really well at university. And he is doing really well, and he's got a very proud mummy. Mum, sorry.
Lyn, it's been fabulous talking to you. 1 hour just goes like 5 minutes. It really does. I know how much they've all got from it, because you can hear a pin drop, because they've listened to everything you've had to say. Thank you not just for telling your story, but for sharing some of the difficult parts as well, because some things in life can be quite painful at times. But also it means that by sharing, people here who maybe can relate to some of the things you've said can feel supported by you, by God, in their situations, because of your ability to be honest and share. Ladies and gentlemen, Lyn Weston.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, they're lovely. Thank you very much.